Okay, in today's tutorial I thought I would do a video on how to paint fire. Now I've done some tutorials on this before, but I've been working on this particular painting at the moment. It's not yet finished, but this area of this particular piece started to remind me of maybe flames or flame-like structures anyway. So I've done some tutorials in the past where I've looked at different types of flames. I've done a candle flame and I've also done some sort of slightly bigger matchstick flames. But on today's tutorial, I'm looking to produce something where it's more like a burning torch. So it's kind of bigger flames where they start to get a bit more of a life of their own and more interesting shapes as well. So I'll be getting more into kind of territory where it would be a useful kind of form and shape for various different kind of fire and flame situations. So I've just created a dark background on the background layer. Now the brushes I'm going to use soft brushes for this because you don't get any hard textures, any strong lines as such. It's all very much one colour fading into another. Even if they fade quite rapidly from one colour into another, it is generally a smooth transition. So I'm going to use a soft airbrush. So I'm just going to use the regular version of this brush. So you can see I've not changed it, which is why it won't allow me to reset it, because it's just the default version of that. So it really should be easy enough to use the same brushes that I'm using and follow along. But before I start on the actual flames, I'm going to create something that is a form that I imagine would be on fire. It just helps give it a little bit of context, so that will do. I'm really not caring much about this form. It's just going to be something that is going to be on fire. In fact, I'm going to move it down slightly so I give myself more space up here to actually get to grips with the actual fire itself. And the colour I'm going to start with is going to be over towards the sort of red, maybe like a dark orange, pretty much a red, and then I'm going to take it out of the white area and more into the quite heavily saturated version of that. I'll go over to my brushes, my brush control. So I'm turning the size down. I don't want it really to be very strong to begin with. So now I've got the actual burning piece of wood, or the piece of wood that I'm going to add some flames to. I'm just going to start with some basic lines. Now I'm doing these quite bright just so you can pick them up on camera a little bit better, but you can see I'm starting with a gentle curve, but very quickly the wind forces or any other kind of heat dynamics are going to start changing the behavior of this flame. I'm having it sort of start to develop a life of its own, and it sort of twists and turns. So you almost get like a sharp corner, even though it's not really. What it's made up of is a curve that's folding in on itself and then curving up there as well. So I'll do something similar on the other side. And that is the kind of shape that really we're after. So they're quite random. They don't have a uniformity. They're not kind of predictable, but you can see there's a certain left and right kind of movement there. I've tried to make it a little bit random, and it's going to be just a bit more realistic really when it comes to the overall look at it. What you want to avoid is anything that's looking too uniform and adhering too much to an obvious pattern really. But there is some sort of pattern in terms of going to the right and to the left and then to the right again, and this one kind of does the same kind of gestures. And then the way they interact, you can see that one's kind of almost hugging the other a little bit, but it doesn't line up with it. So you don't necessarily want one that's going like this and then one that's doing exactly the opposite, because you'll end up with too much of an obvious pattern. Having said that, you do want something like these kind of diamond shapes or a distorted version of them, because this is what kind of gives you the kind of angular quality, almost like diamond shapes. You can see that. Now they are actually in this piece too, so you can see one there, one sort of forming there. Like I say, they are heavily distorted, but those shapes are kind of there. So because I don't want that layer really to be quite that strong, I'm going to turn the opacity of that down just a little bit, so it's going to be a useful guide, but I don't want it to show up that strongly. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go for a slightly stronger colour than that, a bit more red, and I'm going to start adding some more orange tones into these areas. The thing is with flames and fire is that you actually get lighter at the edges of these kind of forms. So it's a bit like you would be shading on a solid mass. You might get some darker shadows on the edge. With flames you actually get like a lighter, more intense version of the flame actually on the edge. So it's actually in the center when you can see through it more easily that you get the dark background or whatever background it is coming through. So you get an intensity on the edges and then it fades through to more of a translucency in the center sort of areas. Now I'm using these lines as a rough guide, but I'm not sticking extremely closely to them. So I'm using them and I'm having a little bit of just creating a bit more interest, a bit more of inconsistency along that line. Maybe take areas and thicken them up. It's where you can start to just use your imagination a little bit more and perhaps just use some of these shapes and imagine another bit curling off like a bump that might stick out here, for example. Maybe this could have another little section there. But there is no right and wrong with flames, but there's definitely some things that would look more believable, I think, is perhaps the best way of thinking of it. And sometimes you just have to use your judgment, because there's no definite kind of shapes that you would get, but sometimes you can tell what's definitely not right more than you can what's definitely correct. So as you can see, whenever one colour or one line overlaps another, you get an intensity of light, because it's, to a certain extent, it's about mass. Right, I can imagine almost branching off here, so there's a slightly thicker form here. Maybe it just goes off the top of the canvas there, so we don't quite see the top of it. Maybe there's some random kind of little shapes that are separated from it. Maybe here you can imagine this is broken in two, so there's another little section that comes off it there. Maybe it's like another diamond shape, like a distorted diamond shape that's come off it. Okay, so I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to use a much lighter colour, so I'm going to more towards the yellows and lightening it up, moving it more towards the white slightly as well. So I'm going to turn the size of my brush down and turn the opacity down. I want to do this gradually. I don't want to rush headlong at it. If you move too quickly to an intense lighter colour, then you're going to see just too quickly a transition from your orange into the yellow, and the chances are it's not going to look as subtle, it's not going to be as smooth a transition. So what I want to start doing now, because I said, if you remember, the edges are going to have more of an intensity, so you're going to get a more of an intense yellow and perhaps more of an intense white later on along the edge. So we're just going to start picking out some of these edges. Now you don't want to treat it all exactly the same, so it might be on certain areas, like here, that you have an extra thick kind of area. Maybe it's even made up of two lines, so you get a little bit of a gap in the centre. And then maybe it goes here along the edge. Maybe it's intenser on that edge, but maybe not at the bottom of that. So maybe you have an extra thick area to this curve. Might even go back and create another random shape that's curling off it here. You'll find this with fires, that it's about what, if does there seem to be an empty area, does it feel like it might curl back here a little bit? This is the way you have to kind of treat it. It is almost sculptural. Is there a kind of balance to it? So I'm using these different colours on different layers, just because if I go wrong on one particular layer, it's easy to erase that one detail, but I won't lose the background then. So I'm going to thicken up this area here, maybe curl it into there, have them joining up, because you'll find this a lot with flames, is that you'll get weird connections. You might get one area that appears to be part of another curve, but it might start to melt into another area. Maybe just have some area of this with a bit of more yellow. Now I'm going to go over this with white as well later to really strengthen up some of those highlights. Maybe there's just some extra strands that come down here. Now initially you start with more sort of straight lines that then start to get distorted and contorted off, but to begin with you might just have more of a sense of a line going straight up, maybe a few lines that work together. Like I said, you can see through. They are translucent when they are thinner or more towards the centre, so you'll see one line going behind another. Maybe it goes up here and joins up here even. So I do want some of this orange to show through, but I'm thinking this area generally is going to be a bit more intense, so I'm starting to add some of the yellow to it overall. So I'm just covering over this area a bit more. There isn't a right and wrong, there's just more of a sensitivity to what feels right. And that might be frustrating for some people perhaps, but it's one of the things that actually makes me more interested in it as a subject matter, because I love that kind of random shapes, the random quality. Makes me feel that this is more of like a living, unique thing rather than just something that obeys strict kind of laws. Kind of has a life of its own, which I find fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another layer. This time I'm going to move more towards some of the lightest colours really. I may use white at the very end, but this is almost the white, and you can see up here that it's still in yellow, but it's almost towards the white, so it's an extremely light version of the yellow. So now I'm going to be a bit more careful with where I use it. So I might use it just in one or two areas of the lower section. Again, it's just important not to use it consistently. So use it just a little area of it here, a little area there, maybe something in the center area as well. But it's when it gets a little bit higher up that we get a bit more of a consistent kind of thickening up of these forms. So when they start to sort of build up, imagine them in terms of density. I know it's difficult to imagine perhaps something like flames as having density, but I guess if you imagine it as layers, where the one layer is on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, you've got a lot more to look through. So you're not going to see the background, you're going to see more of an kind of build-up of that light. So anything here where you've got a thicker mass overlapping another thicker mass, then that juncture is definitely going to be a real bright area. But what you'll find is it probably influences the whole region as well. So that might be an area where, you know, is the brightest, but then it might extend beyond that point a little bit more. Perhaps it has an influence on it. What I generally find is the middle section of the flame is where it's going to get the most intensity. So you might find towards the top it becomes more like the oranges and the reds as the intensity fades away, and at the bottom it hasn't quite had a chance to build up that intensity yet, so it's going to be in the middle section that you're going to get some of that brightest light. Again, maybe just a little bit of a blob contained within the colours there. So you wouldn't generally get the whitest colour on its own because it looks strange on the black background. It tends to be surrounded by the next appropriate colour. So the whitest yellow would be surrounded by an orange, and the orange would be surrounded by the red. You tend to sort of build it up in layers like that. Remember, it is translucent, so aside from the obvious areas around the edges that it might have some highlights, you might have one line that goes behind it that has an edge to itself. So you might get also a bright light or a line that goes right through the center of a shape too. You've got to perhaps just get your head around the kind of 3D-ness of it, because it is very much a kind of 3D shape twisting and merging and you know, going behind another shape, and it is a very sculptural kind of form in a sense. Okay, I'm going to now just move on to another layer, and this time I'm going to go for pretty much a pure white. I'm just going to, just in areas, pick up a real intense sort of whiteness to that, just to really exaggerate the light effect. I don't know how well this extreme end of the light is going to pick up on camera. I've tried to, I've turned the opacity, or rather the brightness of the screen down somewhat, so that hopefully you can pick up on a little bit more. But I'm aware of the fact that some of these lighter colours are going to get merged in together. But I'll show you like a still image of it, a JPEG at the end of the video anyway. Like I say, I'm reserving the white areas for somewhere in the centre region most. I may just get a little touch of it here, a little bit here, but the most of it, the majority of that white colour is going to be somewhere in the centre region. What I'm going to do is just go back to my previous layers, maybe the kind of light orange colour. I'm going to just start adding some more of that in to the background. Might be some areas that I feel could benefit more of a gradual transition from the red into the brightest yellow and the white. So I'm just going to go over this, get rid of some of the red colour a little bit more. I decide just to make the feel of the light orange just a bit more apparent in some upper regions. In fact, I think I may go back to the red layer that's underneath. And I'm going to add just a little bit more of that as well, especially for the upper regions. Remember, I'm using the layer underneath, so it doesn't matter how much of a do are in this area, it's not going to go over the top of the white or the lightest yellow, so it's not going to damage any of the upper layers. I'm just going to make it just more of an obvious difference between the lighter colours in this region and then some reds a bit higher up. So whenever you start off, if you followed along on my candle flame tutorial especially, or even the matchstick ones, you'll know that there are some blue colours that start off a flame. So in this region, you're just going to get a note of blue at the start of it. You don't want to overdo that though, a little bit goes a long way with this. Now if I wanted to, at this point, just go and smooth in any of the edges. Some of the flames are perhaps not as smooth as I'd like, especially on the light orange. So if I use the smudge brush, again on a medium airbrush, not too big a brush, the smudge you want to do it a bit more gradually, and I can just blend in some of these transitions. They might be a bit too textured, you can see the brush marks a bit too heavily, so I can easily go over these edges and just start to blur them in a little bit, smudge them in, and perhaps you get a slightly softer transition, maybe a smoother look overall. But it kind of depends on what scale you're going to look at it. If you're going to look at it from slightly further away, it matters a little less perhaps. Okay, so that was a relatively quick tutorial. I'm going to do more of these. I'm going to do some flames that perhaps you get like a large section of flames or a closer detail of flames at a certain point in the future. But I think for today, that's kind of satisfied my curiosity for wanting to get a bit more fire painted. And again, like I say, I'm in the middle of a painting, and if there's anything else that comes out of this that I feel that people might find interesting or want to know about, then I'm going to produce more tutorials on that too. I do intend to produce one later in the week, so I'm off as a teacher, I'm off on half term for this week, so I might do another video. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people that have subscribed already. If you've not subscribed yet, please make sure you press the bell notification button next to the subscribe button. And those people that have visited my Patreon page and supported me there, a massive thank you again to you. There is a link down in the description for that as well. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial. I shall catch you back here again. See you later.